Step aside, now!
I am walking home. I've done nothing wrong.
Look at him. He's holding the medal.
This is who I am.
I didn't realize.
Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can enjoy these stories. It was a bright, sunny afternoon in the small town of Glenwood. The streets were lined with tidy houses, green lawns, and children playing on the sidewalks. Birds chirped softly, and the occasional dog barked in the distance. Elijah Brooks, a calm and observant man in his late 20s, walked home from his job at a local hardware store. He carried a small paper bag filled with groceries, and his headphones played soft jazz, which helped him unwind after a long day. Elijah had always loved walking through this neighborhood. The streets were familiar, and he often greeted neighbors with a nod or a friendly smile. But today, he noticed something different. A police cruiser was idling near the corner of Fifth Avenue and Maple Street. The car's engine hummed quietly, and the officer inside seemed to be watching the street, his eyes scanning pedestrians with unusual intensity. As Elijah passed a row of hedges, the cruiser slowly followed. He felt a slight unease creeping in. He had done nothing wrong, yet a sense of scrutiny pressed down on him. It wasn't the first time he had felt this way. He had grown accustomed to being watched differently in public because of his skin color. But today, the feeling was sharper, heavier, almost tangible. The cruiser's engine finally shut off. The officer, a tall man named James Whitman, stepped out. Whitman had a reputation in town, quick-tempered, arrogant, and with a history of judging people by the color of their skin. He didn't approach casually. His pace was deliberate, and his gaze locked on Elijah with suspicion, as if he were studying a criminal. "Hey! Stop right there," Whitman barked, his voice cutting through the quiet street. Elijah froze mid-step, slowly lifting his hands to show compliance. "Yes, officer? Did I do something wrong?" Whitman didn't answer immediately. He took another step forward, his hand hovering near his holster. "I've seen you walking around this neighborhood before. You match the description of a suspicious individual," he said sharply. Elijah's heart rate quickened, though he remained composed. He knew that arguing wouldn't help. He had learned to navigate such encounters calmly, observing body language, tone, and environment. Around them, a few neighbors peeked through windows, noticing the confrontation. Children paused mid-play, sensing tension in the air. "I'm just walking home from work," Elijah said, keeping his voice steady. "I haven't done anything wrong." Whitman's eyes narrowed. "Don't talk back. I'm telling you to step aside and show me your hands. Now." Elijah complied, raising both hands slowly. His mind raced. How would he handle this? He couldn't let the situation escalate, but he also couldn't allow the officer's biased assumptions to go unchecked. The air seemed to thicken around them. Even the breeze felt heavy. Elijah glanced at the houses, at the neighbors quietly watching from porches and windows. Some had already started filming discreetly on their phones, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Whitman stepped closer, his voice dropping slightly but still sharp. "I know what I'm doing. Step aside. Now." Elijah's calm eyes met the officer's. "Officer," he said softly but firmly, "I am not a threat. I am a citizen walking home. I would like to resolve this peacefully." Whitman's hands twitched slightly near his belt. He wasn't used to being questioned in public, and he certainly wasn't used to anyone maintaining calm in the face of his authority. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, quickly replaced by arrogance. Elijah realized this was his chance. One wrong move, and the encounter could spiral out of control. But he had a plan, subtle, clever, and public, to expose the bias without risking anyone's safety. And then, Whitman took a step forward, unaware that he was about to meet a calm, intelligent opponent who would turn his assumptions upside down. Whitman's boots clicked loudly against the pavement, breaking the quiet rhythm of the street. He stopped about 3 feet away from Elijah, leaning slightly forward as if his presence alone could intimidate him. "Hands on your head," he commanded. Elijah shook his head slowly. "I don't want to escalate this. I've done nothing wrong." Whitman's face reddened. "Don't argue with me. I decide who looks suspicious, and right now you fit the description." Elijah noticed a tension in the neighborhood rise. A couple of kids peeked out from behind fences. A teenager held a phone ready, and Mrs. Fields from 2 houses down stood by her porch, her eyes wide with concern. People were starting to sense the injustice unfolding in front of them. Whitman's hand hovered near his holster again. Elijah remained calm, but he subtly scanned the area. There were no immediate threats, just the officer's bias and the growing audience. He knew that demonstrating composure in front of witnesses could shift the power dynamic. "Officer," Elijah said, his voice steady but firm, "I understand you're doing your job, but stopping someone solely based on their appearance is not justice. It is fear and prejudice. You have a choice here. You can either escalate or do the right thing." Whitman blinked, momentarily taken aback. He wasn't used to being addressed with calm reasoning, especially in public. I'm just trying to protect this neighborhood," he muttered. Elijah nodded. "I respect safety, but fear should not guide your actions. Actions should be guided by facts." At that moment, Elijah reached under his shirt, pulling out a small, gleaming pin, a Medal of Valor he had received for bravery in a community crisis several years prior. It was subtle, almost hidden, but it caught the sunlight as he held it between his fingers. Whitman froze. His hand twitched involuntarily. What is that?" "It's a symbol of service, commitment, and courage," Elijah said. "I have risked my life to protect people, and today I am asking for the same respect I have given others. I am not a threat, officer. Your assumptions are." Neighbors gasped. Phones clicked. The small crowd that had been watching quietly now began murmuring, realizing the officer's error. Whitman opened his mouth to speak, but the words failed him. He had underestimated the man in front of him. Calm, composed, intelligent, and morally strong. Elijah continued, "You can choose to escalate the situation, or you can step back and recognize that assumptions have consequences." Whitman's face reddened further, caught between arrogance and embarrassment. He looked around at the silent witnesses, their phones recording every moment. He realized that every action was being documented. Every biased assumption he had made was now public. For a brief moment, the arrogance that had defined him faltered. The reality of accountability and public scrutiny hit him hard. Elijah lowered the pen, holding his hands visibly. "I am a citizen, a neighbor, a man walking home. I pose no threat. The only threat here is the choice to act on prejudice rather than fact." The street went quiet. Even the breeze seemed to pause. Whitman's body language betrayed uncertainty. His hands, once hovering near his holster, now trembled slightly. Then a sound, a distant siren, pierced the air, signaling the approach of Sergeant Laura Benson, who had been nearby. Whitman's pause was a precursor to the arrival of accountability, and the confrontation was about to shift. The distant wail of the approaching siren made the tension on the street almost unbearable. Elijah Brooks stood calmly, hands visible, his gaze steady, while Officer James Whitman struggled to maintain the illusion of authority. The small crowd had grown. Neighbors emerged from their homes. Teens recorded on their phones, and even a few local shopkeepers peeked out from behind glass windows. "Step back now," Whitman barked. Try to regain control of his composure, but his voice lacked its usual edge. It wavered, faltered, and carried a hint of uncertainty. Elijah, in contrast, maintained a quiet confidence that seemed to amplify the officer's unease. "Everyone, please stay calm," Elijah addressed the bystanders, his tone firm yet composed. "Nothing will escalate as long as we act with clarity and patience." His words were not just for the crowd. They were a subtle reminder to Whitman that the world was watching, and that any rash action could have consequences far beyond his badge. The officer's hand twitched again near his holster. He was sweating under the summer sun, his uniform clinging slightly to his back. He glanced at the crowd, noting the countless eyes upon him. Phones were pointed directly at him, ready to capture his every move. The tension was palpable. Every second seemed stretched, as if time itself had slowed to observe the unfolding drama. A young woman from across the street whispered, "He's brave, just standing there." Another neighbor murmured, "This officer has no idea what he's dealing with." Whitman cleared his throat, attempting to regain authority. "I'm asking again, move to the side." His voice now carried less conviction, tinged with frustration and growing panic. Elijah took a careful step forward, remaining calm. "Officer Whitman, I am a man of the community. I have served and contributed positively to this town. My actions today are entirely peaceful, and my intent is to avoid conflict. I am asking you to do the same." Whitman's eyes darted around, catching the glint of the Medal of Valor Elijah had displayed earlier. The medal shone brightly in the sunlight, reflecting onto the pavement and directly into Whitman's eyes. For the first time, the officer seemed genuinely uncertain, his rigid posture faltering. You served?" Whitman stammered. "Yes, sir," Elijah replied calmly. "I've risked my life for people I've never even met. And today, I am risking my dignity to ensure justice is served, for myself and for principle of fairness." By now, whispers were circulating through the crowd. The local teenager, whose phone had been recording since the start, shouted, "This guy's a hero. Look at the medal." Others nodded, murmuring approval. The atmosphere was electric. The town had collectively shifted from passive observation to active witness. Whitman's breathing quickened. His attempts to assert control were undermined by the crowd's attention, the approaching siren, and the undeniable proof of Elijah's service. For once, his authority alone was insufficient. He was no longer the unquestioned figure of power he had assumed. Then, a new sound entered the scene. The brisk footsteps of Sergeant Laura Benson, a respected officer known for fairness and integrity. She approached quickly, her uniform immaculate, and her eyes scanning the entire street. She had been alerted to a potential issue and arrived just in time. "Officer Whitman," she called sharply yet calmly, "step back and explain what's happening here." Whitman's jaw tightened. He looked at Benson, then at the gathering crowd, and finally at Elijah, whose calm composure seemed to mock his insecurity. The tension reached its peak. The public, the officer, and the veteran locked in a moment of suspended judgment, each aware that what happened next would define the rest of the day. Sergeant Benson stepped between Elijah and Whitman, her presence commanding immediate respect from both the officer and the crowd. "Explain yourself, Whitman," she said, her voice steady but firm. Whitman struggled, flustered. "As sergeant, I saw someone walking suspiciously, and I thought—" His words trailed off as he realized the futility of his excuses. The crowd's phones were recording, every hesitation amplified in real time. Elijah maintained his calm stance. "Sergeant, I was walking home from work. I posed no threat. Your officer acted based on assumptions, not facts. You can review this footage and see for yourself." Benson's eyes narrowed. She looked from Whitman to Elijah and then surveyed the crowd. "Is this true?" she asked Whitman. "Yes, but Whitman stammered, unable to complete his sentence. "Stop," Benson interrupted sharply. "Assumptions and bias have no place in law enforcement. Your actions today are unacceptable." Neighbors began whispering to each other, some clapping softly, while others continued recording. The tension in the air shifted slightly, from fear and suspense to a sense of justice finally asserting itself. Elijah spoke, his voice carrying through the street. "I am not seeking punishment. I am seeking accountability. This town deserves officers who serve without prejudice. Today, you've been held accountable, publicly, fairly, and peacefully." Whitman's face reddened. He had not anticipated public scrutiny, nor had he prepared for a calm, articulate man confronting him with moral authority. He looked at the phones, the watching neighbors, and the sergeant, a web of accountability closing around him. Sergeant Benson placed a reassuring hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You handled this perfectly, Elijah. Your composure and courage prevented an escalation that could have turned dangerous." Whitman looked down, his ego bruised, and nodded reluctantly. He knew his behavior had been exposed, both to the public and internally within the department. Within minutes, news of the encounter began circulating through social media, thanks to the videos recorded by neighbors. Whitman's actions were reviewed by Internal Affairs and by Sergeant Benson herself. The footage clearly showed a man stopped without cause, a tense confrontation, and a crowd observing the situation as it unfolded. Whitman faced immediate reprimand. His biases were documented, and mandatory sensitivity and procedural training were scheduled. The story of Elijah's composure and the officer's exposed prejudice became a talking point in the town, a lesson in accountability and the power of calm, reasoned action. Neighbors spoke to reporters, praising Elijah's courage and the community's role in holding authority accountable. He didn't escalate. He didn't argue. He just stood there and showed the truth, said one resident. That's how we want to see justice. Elijah, however, remained humble. I didn't seek recognition, he told a local reporter. I only wanted to ensure fairness and respect. People must remember that bias exists, and it's our responsibility to confront it peacefully whenever possible. Whitman's career was temporarily shadowed by the incident. The public scrutiny made him more cautious, and he realized that unchecked assumptions and prejudice could destroy both credibility and community trust. Days later, the town of Glenwood reflected on what had happened. The story of Elijah Brooks and Officer Whitman became a symbol of accountability, courage, and the importance of public vigilance. Elijah returned to his routine, walking through the streets with the same quiet confidence, aware that he had made a difference. Children waved as he passed. Neighbors nodded respectfully, and even some local officers gave him a polite salute, recognition not for heroism in battle, but heroism in moral courage. Sergeant Benson commended him privately. You showed everyone today what dignity and reason can achieve. You turned a dangerous situation into a lesson for the whole town. Elijah smiled. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it for fairness, for myself, for the community, and for the principle that prejudice should never go unchecked. In Glenwood, the encounter became a lesson, a reminder that power, authority, and assumptions can be challenged peacefully, and that integrity and calm resolve often triumph over fear, bias, and arrogance. And for Elijah Brooks, walking home through those familiar streets would never feel quite the same. He had faced prejudice, maintained dignity, and emerged as a living example of justice in action, and the town would not soon forget it. Thank you so much for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love reading them. And don't forget to share this video with friends or family who believe in justice, courage, and standing up against bias. Your support helps bring more powerful, real-life stories to everyone. Remember, courage and truth always win.